Hi, my name is Brandy, and I will be presenting my ethical vignette presentation. So, to summarize the story, in whose records presented by Pearson Media Player, the counselor starts by stating to the client that in their previous session, they had discussed a referral to another counselor. And the client agrees that they had discussed that in the previous session and states that she does not want to be offensive, but she believes that that their counseling relationship is not benefiting her. So the counselor responds by acknowledging the client feels upset, but next she asks in a somewhat condescending tone what meaning the client holds in seeing a new therapist every 3 to 4 weeks. And then switching. So the client responds by restating that she just wants to go see another counselor regardless of her counseling history. She asks for the counselor's notes, which she claims have been shared with other people. So counselors that she's had before have shared notes with this counselor. She just wants all of her notes combined together. So the client wants her records and to terminate services now. The counselor responds that she does not think that what she has written in her notes will be helpful to the client. The client does not believe it is relevant that the counselor believes that her notes will not be helpful, and the client is asking to take the notes with her. And that concludes the summary of the situation. So the problems presented in this scenario would be ethical and legal. The ethical problem is presented because of what the counselor is not doing, and the counselor is not releasing the client records when asked to do so. It's a legal issue because according to the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA requires medical records to be released to the client whenever they request them, as long as no harm is done through the release of that information. And that was found on the Office of Civil Rights webpage 2022. There are several violations in this dilemma that go against the ACA Code of Ethics and state codes. So the ACA Code of Ethics 2014, Section B6E, Client Access, states that when clients request their records, counselors are to provide them with those records unless sufficient evidence suggests that the records would harm the client. If counselors are adamant about withholding records, they must document the client record request and their reasons for withholding. The ACA Code of Ethics 2014 Section B6F, Assistance with Records, states that counselors are expected to provide assistance and consultation explaining counseling records. And the counselor in this dilemma did not present her reasoning behind withholding records, other than it just would not be helpful to the client. She didn't explain how it could be harmful to the client or to others. On the North Carolina Board of Licensed Clinical Mental Health Counselors website, it states under laws and codes that we adhere to the ACA Code of Ethics 2014. So what I just discussed about the ACA Code of Ethics applies to the North Carolina state laws and regulations in regards to this situation. So federal laws and regulations that were not adhered to were 42 U.S. Code 9501 Bill of Rights, Section H, which states that clients have the right to confidentiality to his or her records. And also the 42 U.S. Code 9501 Bill of Rights, Section I, Subsection I and II, clients should be able to request and access mental health care records unless refused because of third-party confidentiality assurance or because release could harm the client. And there was not a third party involved in this situation, so the third-party confidentiality assurance was not applicable to this situation, and how releasing records could harm the client was not described. So the nature and dimensions of this scenario violated moral principles were autonomy, justice, beneficence, and non-maleficence. I believe that the priority moral principle that was being violated in this scenario was autonomy. So the autonomy of the client is the ability given to the client to make his or her own decisions and have control over his or her own life. And that was presented in Forrester, Miller, and Davis 2016 in their article. And autonomy was compromised in the scenario by the counselor not allowing the client to obtain her records and choose what she wished to do with them. Polychronis 2020 addressed the importance of client autonomy in his article about electronic health record systems, EHRs. Polychronis 2020 believes that there should be more restriction regarding EHRs. In another study, Mork et al. 2016 advocates for legality being more flexible with sharing client information and integrative care online. And this topic of sharing information digitally is highly debated. Professional counselors who I know and who adhere to the ACA Code of Ethics are Gina Phillips with Gina Phillips PLLC and Dr. Catherine Ann Seleska from Goldsboro Counseling Center, PA. I know that I could talk to both of these professionals about scenarios like these. Counseling organizations that are related to ethical issues and who I could learn more about this from would be the American Mental Health Counselors Association, AMHCA, and the National Board for Certified Counselors, NBCC. So on the About Us webpage, on the AMHCA website, it states that collaboration, advocacy, research, ethical practice, education, training, and professional development are promoted. The NBCC About Us webpage states that the organization offers national certification for counselors who have completed education, examination, supervision, experience, and ethical guidelines. So potential courses of actions would be to provide the records to the client regardless of my beliefs held about the client switching therapists so frequently. Another action that could be taken would be for the counselor to explain to the client why she may believe that the releasing of records could cause harm or not be helpful. The counselor could also communicate about how she receives and transports records to assure the client that her records are safely and securely protected. So Caraway et al. 2020 studied granular information deontological principalism, which is applied in cases where crisis is not presented and clients are expected to be treated with care regarding their autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. So Lara and Henderson 2021 promoted programs like Consent to Share, C2S, which is a type of granular information, and it gives clients full control of their medical records electronically. Daniel 2020 states that the counselor must respect a client's rights to his or her decisions, regardless if they agree with those decisions. And the counselor did not demonstrate that in this scenario. If the client decides to take this issue to court and sends the counselor a subpoena for her notes, the counselor would be required to speak with an attorney first and may be required to share her notes in court. And that was presented in Rimley and Harley 2020 in that textbook. So consequences for each course of action. The potential consequences for simply releasing the counselor records to the client would be that the client could use them to harm herself or others. Potential consequences for using online record keeping systems like Consent to Share, presented by Caraway et al., would be client misunderstanding of record keeping and transferring and accidental allowance of record sharing. I do not see potential consequences for thoroughly explaining to the client the processes of record keeping and using the deontological principalism presented by Lara and Henderson 2021. The actions that I would choose would be using the deontological principalism presented by Lara and Henderson 2021. And also I would thoroughly inform the client of why I will not release the records if I hold sufficient evidence against releasing her records. So the evaluation of the course of action, Forrester, Miller, and Davis, 2016, present the test of justice, the test of publicity, and the test of universality. So the test of justice, I would treat other clients with the same actions that I am treating this client with. So the actions presented, I would do the same thing with other clients. With the test of publicity, I would be okay with sharing my courses of action publicly. And for the test of universality, I would offer these courses of actions to other counselors. The implementation steps that I would take would be step 1, explain how I keep my records to the client. Step 2, explain how I receive and send records. Step 3, if the client is not a danger to herself or others, through obtaining her records, I would give her my notes in paper and have them online. And step 4, I would give referral options to my client and wish her well in her therapeutic journey. And here are my references. Thank you.